everyone. How you all doing tonight? Nah, that wasn't very loud. How's everybody doing? Great. All right. Well, welcome to the beginning of the ATD SCC fiscal year, and our first program of the year. And we're incredibly lucky to have our friend Michael Leckie returning, but I'll do that intro in a little bit. A couple quick things we want to share with you all. First of all, one of my favorite topics in the world is networking. Why? I don't know about some of you who are, maybe students or whatever, but I built my business through networking. It's where I have my team that I can deploy anywhere. It's how I know great people like Michael Leckie and Laura Brown and other people here in the room that keep my capabilities to work with my clients powerful. I can't do everything. My network can. So when you look around the room, think about the expertise that you have available to you and how you build that team that you will be able to deploy over time. Really important. Couldn't do any of this without our board of directors. Three of us are here tonight. I'm the president. Pan is on our membership team. Ross, thank God for Ross. I sure wouldn't be successful without him doing this. And you can see some of the other names. That said, we do have some needs. For those of you who have an interest in being on the board and helping out, we could really use some additional help, particularly in sponsorships. Sponsorships makes this organization continue to run with the income that we make from them. We don't have anybody chairing that seat right now. Really important. Another one, and maybe I'll just make Len Wysocki the honorary chair of campus relations, since he keeps bringing his classes. But anyway, we need a chair for that because there's obviously, besides University of New Haven, one or two other schools in the neighborhood that would be of value to us to reach out to those in the HR, training, OD, whatever kinds of coursework they're doing. So if anybody's interested in joining the board, please step up. Let me know. Again, we do have sponsors. And we're very grateful to those who have been a sponsor in the past and sponsor in the current time. Power membership. For those of you who haven't been here before, simply what a power member is an individual who has joined both national ATD as well as our local chapter here in Southern Connecticut. And there's advantages to being a member of both. National has infinite resources, job boards, all kinds of training opportunities, professional certification, and of course, local member, which I'm particularly prejudiced about, get to hang out with us. But seriously, we have other activities that are of great excitement. We have a community, we have communities of practice. One is the coaching community of practice, and the second is a learning community of practice. And we're talking about a possible third community of practice, and maybe focused on talent management. So a lot of activity outside the monthly chapter meetings. We also have a YouTube channel. We're being recorded tonight. These chapter meetings that we have and presenters who have come to us month after month, you can now find on our YouTube channel. So if you missed the opportunity to see some of the iconic people that we are able to attract to our meetings on a monthly basis, you haven't missed them officially because you can see them on YouTube. A week or two, James, afterwards?
Generally a day after.
Oh.
Unless they have small humans to tend to.
We had an announcement from ICF. They wanted to talk about the next upcoming meeting. Couldn't find you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Margaret Ruff. I'm the current president studies and working with coaches through the studies. So that might be something interesting to you. Our website is icf-ct.org if you'd like to join us. We'd love to see you.
Thanks, Martin. I'm going to step one minute out of our ATD box. Didn't ask Ross, who's our official Rules Committee chair and everything else, if this is copacetic, but I happen to sit on another board besides here called the Circle of Care, a wonderful organization that works with families in terms of providing financial and emotional support to families who have a child who's been diagnosed with cancer. We have a 5K coming up on Sunday, so any of you who are runners and may be around, the run is here in Wilton. I left information on the back. I don't know if it's copacetic at all to pitch that, but it's a great organization, and I'm very prejudiced. And Ross is running in it, so you can run with him. Ross is running for a lot of things this year. I just want you all to remember we have, oh good, I forgot to change the date. October 15th is a Monday, not October 12th, which James reminded me is actually a Saturday, is our next chapter meeting. We're talking to several people who and we will announce who that speaker will be on the 15th, but whoever it's going to be, guarantee you it's going to be fun. And the only other thing I need to say before I introduce Michael is please fill out our evaluations tonight. I don't have Michelle here to force you to, but Ross is pretty tough too. So it's my real privilege to be able to introduce Michael Leckie, who spoke to us, maybe a year and a half ago, I think, back when he was working for GE in a very unique role, basically trying to create a culture around GE's attempt to become a digital industrial company. Had the opportunity since to listen to Michael talk about other topics over the past year and a half, and to be honest, privileged to be able to have somebody who's thinking all the time about how to do things better, how to make companies better, how to make employees better, how to make leaders better. That's what we're about in this practice, and it's my privilege to introduce Michael Leckie. Thank you. Oh, I should do this first.
So, I've never been accused of not being loud, especially by my wife, so can you all hear me without the microphone?
Yes.
Good, okay. Well, we have technical difficulties in getting the slides up. First of all, a couple of things to start. One is, if you hang around till the end, as incentive here, I do have something for you, a little gift in parting. And something else tonight, what I would love to do, I am going to introduce myself and tell you a little bit about my background, which I'll be honest, I don't normally do, because it's usually not that relevant. But I really would like tonight to be a dialogue. I have not put together the flashy, splashy presentation where I just yak at you all the way through. I really want to have a conversation. There's a couple of points along the way where I'm going to make sure we have that conversation. But I really want you to ask questions, to push back, to give me your thoughts. Other thing I'm doing, I'm going to share some things with you tonight that actually I've never shared before, never put out in public. A number of these things are the basis for a book that I'm working on. So, your thoughts, your input will be very valuable to me as I craft that and move forward with it. So, please feel free to ask and share anything. So, a little bit about myself. Thank you. I spent the last 2 years before I left about 6 months ago at General Electric as the Chief Learning Officer for the Digital Industrial Transformation. For those of you who have not paid attention, what the then CEO, Jeff Immelt, was trying to do was turn a 130-year-old manufacturing and marketing company that builds amazing machines and services those machines into a platform as a service company that sold data analytics and sold outcomes to businesses that use those machines and the whole value chain in which they operate. And GE has gone through some challenging times. Those of you who followed it have watched the stock drop a great deal. There was a bit of a perfect storm with some of the different businesses coming together. I'm glad to talk a little bit about that. And I'll be as candid as I can. It's just we're on camera, since I do have an agreement that makes sure that I talk very positively. But I really only have positive things to say about GE. But the company has taken a direction that meant that what I was doing is really less relevant than it had been. So I left about 6 months ago and have been doing some consulting work as I try to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. So that's a little bit about me. The ensuing 12 years before that, I worked for a company called Gartner, which many of you be familiar with, headquartered down in Stanford. I had a number of roles there, both as a global head of HR for a number of their businesses, and then running a P&L as a general manager for a CXO, a C-suite advisory business called Executive Programs, where I had a number of roles there. So I've been in and out of human resources, learning and development, organization development, and talent roles, either as a consultant or as a practitioner my entire career, which I won't say how long it is because that'll age me more than the gray in my beard. So here's what I'd like to do tonight. When John and I got together, he said, okay, you gotta come do something for me here. What are we gonna do? And we sat down and we talked it through. And one of the things I shared with him is my love of coaching, but specifically what I think it means in a digital age. And the world, as we know, is changing around us, definitely, and faster. So we're going to talk about coaching and being more coach-like, as we'll get to, as one of what I think are the 5 key capabilities in a digital age. So what I'd like to do with you tonight, and again, this will be a dialogue, and I'll attempt not to trip myself on your cord there. We'll talk about what coaching is, and we'll get into a conversation at the tables around that in just a few moments, and being more coach-like, to use my friend's term. We'll talk about curiosity and what I kind of call the 5 ways of showing up digital. A little bit about the coaching equation. I'll touch on one of my heroes, Ed Schein's 4.5 levels of relationships and what his concept around the nodes in the network. We'll talk about personalization. It's not a typo, it's not personalization. We'll talk about personalization, which is one of Ed's terms. And I'm going to give you a tool that you can walk away with that a friend of mine is repackaged and calls Quick Set Intimacy, which you can call it whatever you want to, but it's a really interesting tool, and you'll get the slides so you can use it. And then a little bit about the coaching habit, which is some work that another friend of mine does. So I'm borrowing and stealing from a lot of people that I think are great that have come before me, bringing some new things, and hopefully it's going to be something that you'll really enjoy. So, what is coaching? We're going to start with that, but before we do that, you decided to give up your evening. And I know this wasn't for the great salad and chicken. You decided to give up your evening for more and come here and spend some time with colleagues and people in your network. There's a good group from University of New Haven, the students, and then there's a great group of practitioners and professionals out here. What I would like to do is we have about 90 minutes, maybe a little bit less to spend together. So I would like to hear from you why you came and what you're hoping to get out of this, just knowing what you know about even the title of what's going on. And if you didn't read the title, you just show up because you trust John and Ross and the guys, that's great. But I'd like to take 2 minutes to hear from you what you hope to get out of the discussion. So I'll just pause and take a few comments. Yes?
Okay, so I'm just recently converted coach from being an actuary.
Okay.
And then your topic is very interesting because like technology and then coaching. So like, okay, how, what the coach look like in corporation and almost like what's the trend of how to use a coaching skill?
Yeah.
And, and then marry with technology.
Yeah.
So,
how showing, especially with digital technology growth? Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We can do that. Thank you. What else? Who else? Thank you. Yeah.
I've been coaching for over 20 years. It's been my style when I was running companies. And I'm so comfortable in what I do now in my methodology, and I get a lot of positive feedback from my clients that I feel like maybe I'm stuck. Maybe there's something else I can learn.
Okay. Well, we'll throw some things out. And given your a long tenure in this, you may have heard them all, but hopefully I'll have something new for you. Great. Thank you. Yeah, please.
How do you embed a culture of coaching?
Yeah, that's huge. The culture of coaching is huge. We'll definitely talk more about that. Thank you. What else would be useful for the group? Yeah, please.
What do you think will be the impact of AI on coaching?
Impact of AI on coaching. Interesting. Remind me to come back to that, and I'm sure I'll make something up. Great question. Maybe I'll have the group explore that a little bit too. Thank you for that. Please.
I admire coaches. For me, it would be how is coaching an integral or important part of an innovation initiative?
Yeah, absolutely. That's part of innovation. Great question. Great question. We'll touch on that. Anything else? Going once? Okay. So I'm going to get you talking to start and hear what you have to say. So what I'd like you to do is at your table, just in pairs where you're at, if it needs to be 3, but don't do the whole table, a maximum of 3 people together, 2 or 3. I'd like you to actually share with each other over the next 4 or 5 minutes only a story or some stories real quickly in like a 1 or 2 minute story of some of the best coaching, however that showed up or materialized in your life, but some of the best coaching you've ever received. Not gay, for those of you who are professional coaches, but some of the best coaching you've received. So just share that for a minute, and I'll bring us back, and we'll talk about that, and we'll see where I'm going with it. So have that while you're having dinner, have that conversation. What's some of the best coaching?
You guys talk, if you don't know each other. We already. Yeah, no, go. You talk. So
Youngest old, you're up.
mean dinner is served. That's my little pension dinner. Better than screaming away. Thank you so much. I'm going to pause your conversation. So, let me hear some feedback from the tables. When you told those stories, did you see any patterns or notice what were things that those people who gave you great coaching, no matter what the circumstances, that they did well? What are the things that kind of emerged in those conversations they did well? Please.
One of the biggest components for me in my experience over the summer was authenticity from my manager.
Okay.
He never made it seem like a transactional conversation. It was more about me hearing what he had to say, kind of building off of each other, and kind of making it more of a collaborative and meaningful conversation.
Right.
And that just resonated with me more so than him delegating work to me.
Yeah, not the transactional relationship, but a real relationship.
Yes.
Some authenticity. Great, thank you for that. Great feedback. We see someone over. Yes, here.
Confidence in their approach, so their expertise and approach. That
Sure.
may not be what I might have expected, but they were confident and they were right.
Absolutely. Great, confidence. Thank you. What else? What else did you notice in this conversation? Let's go over here. We'll go around, please.
Yeah, what we talked about, a common theme was that I noticed was space, that there was space to grow and develop, as well as space also to that trust to reel someone back in when need to, and but also allow them to grow in other areas.
Right. Space and trust. Let them go. Pull them back. But there's good. So you created that spaciousness, but then there was a lot of trust that you can bring them back in, but also trust to let go and still feel kind of secure in the relationship. Great. Thank you. Back here, Rick.
When we talked about some coaching situations, what seemed to arise is, even though they weren't official coaching situations, the people that they got input from listened. They solicited information and advice, and that's key in any kind of coaching situation, is the ability to listen, and that's what came out.
Coach did some listening as well as talking. Yeah, and I think a point that you made that it wasn't always like formal coaching, right? Just kind of coaching opportunities. Great, thank you. Please,
Yeah, I was just going to emphasize on this. The listening was, again, you can actually see coaching just by listening. You don't have to have a coach. So
absolutely, absolutely. Great, thank you. Who else? Over here, please, yes.
When we were talking, we had two different experiences with coaching that kind of really impacted us. So we had a really bad experience with coaching, and I had a good one. In both cases, they were very willing to be upfront and honest, and like, okay, we got a flaw here. How are we going to work on that? She didn't do it so effectively over here, but with mine, it's continuing, and it's been about a year now that she's been working with me on what we're working on. So
Is that real honesty with you, kind of being clear? And what made that not so good for you?
It was a good person, but she didn't like the way I act in front of other people. So she was like, I like the work you do, but I don't like the way you are. So she didn't, she wasn't helpful. Because she just said that and put it like that, and she didn't gave me the tools to overcome that situation that she didn't have.
Well, that's a key point. Help should be helpful. And so often it isn't. So thank you. We'll touch on this as well. Yeah, please.
Our group also talked about a good coach. They usually help you to be really successful. Like that's what they truly want, to help you to be successful instead of doing something else. Like that's also a good manager. They want to give you skills and experiences for you to be successful.
And you feel like they want the best for you. It's not, maybe in Hannah's case, it was about that person's agenda as opposed to helping her be successful. That's great. Great. Thank you. Yeah, please.
We talked about a coach kind of meeting you where you are and helping you get to that next step versus just telling you where you need to be, kind of seeing where you are, what skills you're bringing to that issue or that thing that you need to overcome, and then helping you work with what you have to get to where you need to be.
Yeah, really seeing you and recognizing you where you are. Absolutely. Great. Any other thoughts, things that emerged from that conversation you want to share about really what made that coaching great? Please.
So one of the best coaching experience I've had is when the coach highlights something which is in your a blind side thing for you, you were not aware, you were vaguely aware of it, but you didn't really think about it, and then you have that aha moment that when you realize, oh, you know what you're saying is perfectly right, and I think that's where I'm blindsided, and this is what I tend to do, or this is a pattern in my behavior that I need to correct or change.
Helping with those aha moments. Great. Thank you. Absolutely. Anyone else? Okay, so the one thing that I want to just highlight, sorry, was someone in the back? No? Oh, and Tarek's point as well, is that some of the best coaching is not an event. It's not a sit down, I'm coaching you sort of. While there's a number of people in the room that do that, for a living, coaching can happen all the time. It's kind of a way of being and interacting. And as we talk more about some of the questions that came up about how a coaching culture is going to show up, especially in a digital organization, why that's important. If it's going to be a part of the culture, it can't be something you do only as an event. It has to be a way that people are relating to each other. So we need to take coaching and break it down to something that's less formal. So, and I'll admit, a lot of my schooling and coaching and where I, gained kind of my expertise and worked with it was many years ago at Gartner, probably about 12 or 15 years ago, working with a good friend and a colleague of mine, Michael Bungay-Stanier from Box of Crayons. And so I fully embraced the work that he's done over the years. And being more coach-like is a term that I'm stealing from him immediately and use it all the time. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about being more coach-like in our interactions, but also not just because we like it because we're coaches, but because why it matters. So here's why I think it matters. And this is the research that I'm working on now, and I hope to publish in the fairly near future, is I think that as we move forward into a digital era with AI and machine learning changing and transforming and eliminating and creating jobs, and with organizations like many of you have experienced moving to much more agile or lean ways of working and adopting some of the paradigms that have come out of the software development world and moving much faster in iterative ways and kind of getting rid of, bureaucracies and organizations used to be killing us, but not as bad because everybody had them. Now we have organizations popping up that don't have the bureaucracy and they're upsetting the apple cart and disrupting that business. So I think there's 5 things that individuals and leaders, there's a little bit of different flavor for each, but individuals really need to embrace and have a part of their repertoire as capabilities in the digital era. And yes, I made all these words up, but digitality. So the first one is really just that digital literacy that gives you enough confidence and competence to move in that world, whether that's something as simple as having an online presence or a LinkedIn profile, whether it's having some sort of command of the tools you use and getting full value out of those software tools used, whether they Microsoft 365 or something like that, using other tools that allow for collaboration, etc. And knowing enough about digital technology itself that you can have some conversation about it. You don't need to know how blockchain works. God knows I've tried to figure it out and I get completely lost. But knowing that basically what it means is when data is stored, it's not stored in one place that one person can manipulate, but it's stored in thousands of places. So if somebody makes a manipulation, the rest of the places catch it and say, oh, that's a fraud, we're going to change that back to what it was. Knowing things like that and having enough conversancy in digital topics is one of the first things. And for those of us who are over a certain age, that's something that's more challenging. For many of the people in the room who are more digital natives, that quickly is going to become something that's just taken for granted. The second one, changeability. And this is not about having a model of organizational change that includes a Gantt chart and a communications plan. It's not about creating a new list of here's who we're going to be and kind of shoving everyone down that road. What this is about is having the ability to change yourself. It's about really even having a practice of changing yourself, of looking for the things that need to change and shift, and knowing why you get stuck when you're trying to do things differently. Change and make sure that I get up every morning for that run and I just don't. I need to understand what's at play that's keeping me from doing that thing that I want to do for my health and keeping me where I'm at. Learnability. We talk a lot about learning organizations. But for me, learnability is that learning and the practice of learning over knowing. If you haven't read, Ed Hess and Catherine Ludwig came out with a great book, Humble is the New Smart. And it's wonderful because Ed talks about the learning organization and what that actually means. And it's not an organization with a big training program. It's an organization really in which I think kind of people wake up every day and wonder what needs to be different. Wonder what may have changed, and they have ways of challenging their own thinking, challenging the assumptions that they make. We wake up and we walk through the day with a lot of assumptions. Rarely do we challenge those assumptions. So learnability. The one we're going to talk about tonight, I don't know if I'm going to stick with that. It's a weird word, but curiositation. But this is around asking more, saying less, and really leading with caring. And somebody mentioned that earlier, that when they were working with someone who gave them a great coaching moment, it was coach-like, they had their best interest at heart. They cared about that person. And a lot of these softer, more emotional words we're finding are things that really matter as we're moving into an era where the machines are going to do a lot of the knowing for us. So it's, if any of you read Carol Dweck's work, it's not about the know-it-all anymore, it's about the learn-it-all and how fast do you learn. And then the last one is that kind of innovatability, which really is embracing innovation everywhere. And by that I mean that having an organization where people are doing their job, whether they're an accountant or they're a machinist or whatever it is, but they're looking at it, they understand enough about technology, they understand enough about change and where they get stuck changing, they're really open to learning, they're really curious, and they say, wouldn't it be cool if? And they take those ideas forward and they share them. Because the wouldn't it be cool if ideas that change businesses, that fundamentally remake their products and their services, here's a little secret, it rarely comes from the top of the house. The great ideas are by the people out there touching the product, touching the customers. And that is why startups that work so flat are able to do so many things, is because the people who know what they're doing get out there and make decisions. They don't wait for someone to tell them it's okay. They don't wait for a strategy. They strategize, they execute on that strategy. As it works, they improve it. Where it doesn't work, they pivot and they fix it, as opposed to waiting for their marching orders. So that really that wouldn't it be cool if mindset. Tonight what I want to do, I want to spend a little time talking to you about the curiosity one. That's where we'll spend our time tonight. And as I get farther on this, I'm glad to talk about it and share any more of it with you as I start thinking more about it and get some of the research done. So any questions about that, just as an anchor point for us? Cool. How's the chicken? Good? All right. Okay. So the equation, and that changed font. We moved it to your computers, but this little thing right here should be right there. So everyone imagine there's a little line like no through the E. Okay. So being more coach-like means not being an expert. If you're telling someone what to do, you can't ask questions. So I will also admit that a lot of the things that I believe and I'm going to present here tonight are developed from studying for a long time under Dr. Ed Schein, Professor Emeritus at MIT, who I love his work and I'll refer to some of his stuff in a little bit here. But being more coach-like means not being an expert. It means asking questions. And that leads to being humble, kind of in the here and now. Because if you're really humble, one of the things you're going to realize is that we are all vulnerable to a changing world. There are two types of people in this world today that are working and responding to the changes around them. There are those that think they've got it all figured out, who are wrong, and there are those who understand what's actually going on. And they know that things can disrupt and change at any time. And kind of the safety and the status of organizations and places they went to earn a living is changing rapidly, whether it's profit, nonprofit, education, business, government, it really doesn't matter. Everything is changing and being disrupted by advances in digital technology and communications. So, you're more coach-like, less of an expert, you know you're vulnerable. If you have that knowledge, that makes it a lot easier to be curious. If you understand that you don't know what's coming next, but something could come up next and it could really be problematic for you, then you'll be okay to say, look, I'm going to ask more, say less, and I'm going to lead with caring about others first. And we'll dive into this a little bit more. So what I'd like to share with you, again, Ed Schein, I had the opportunity to actually participate this last week in a webinar, small group webinar with Ed. And he talks about what he refers to as the kind of levels of relationships. And for him, this is the foundation of how we interact with each other. So I'll start with level -1, and that's where he starts. He says level -1 is just a relationship of domination. He refers to prisoners and guards. It's a relationship. It's just a one-sided oppressive one. It's a very negative one, it's not positive. Good things don't come out of that relationship. And hopefully many of us aren't in really oppressive, relationships. Hopefully most of you, I think, are not in prison because you're here tonight. If you're on furlough, then we'll talk about that later. But that's level -1. He has no 0 because he says, look, either it's a relationship or it isn't. So his level 1 is one that we're going to recognize, unfortunately, a lot from our organizations. And that is transactions among roles. And really what's important here to know is just the roles are what important. So what does that mean? It means that if I'm your manager and we work together, the way the organization sees it is if Joseph comes in and replaces me, that's just fine because it's the same role. So the role, people are fungible. You just put people in the role and the role is what matters. And what matters, and most of our organizations are set up that way. You just put somebody new in the role. Now, how many times have you had someone that you're working for change and that person was just exactly the same? It doesn't happen. How many of you had that experience where it's the same person, it's the same job, you're in the same job, they're in the same job, somebody new comes in, and all of a sudden you're a star performer or your performance has dropped off the face of the earth because that person sees you entirely differently, has an entirely different agenda. The idea that you can move people in and out of roles and it's just transactional and will work and be fungible does not work. But unfortunately, it's the way we run most of our organizations. When someone leaves a role, then we find someone else to fill that role and figure the machine will just keep rolling on, spelling it with 2 L's as opposed to the E, right? But it doesn't happen that way. Level 2, or legal 2 as I mistyped it, personalization. What it talks about here is, it says, this is where someone says, look, I want to know you personally so I can trust you. And his entire thesis is that if you can't move to this level, you're going to have a really hard time being successful in the organizations we have today. Most of the organizations I'm talking to, and I'm talking to one this last week, growing rapidly. They've gone from 200 to about 1,000 people in a little over a year. They've got a great product. They've got a great team. They operate in kind of that holacratic model where there's not a lot of leadership, and it's worked really, really, really well. And now it's getting bigger. And they don't know each other like they did before. When it was 100 or 200 people, you get to know most people, at least they were like one person away from you. Now it's growing, and they're like, how are we going to continue to run the way we run and not become a bureaucracy? Well, if they're doing this, that's not going to happen because they're growing so rapidly, people will be moving in and out of roles. That and they're not real keen on roles. They like people going after the work they need to go after. So you need to start to have those relationships and figure out how you can scale those relationships. So why I'm talking tonight about being more coach-like and why I think it matters most in the organizations that we're encountering or the way our organizations are changing is because I think that being more coach-like is one of, if not the primary key to being able to scale relationships quickly. It's how we talk to one another. It's the relationships we create. It's how we engage, which is going to make a huge difference in being able to have these large companies not become bureaucratic and still stay nimble and still stay agile and still be able to flex and have people move around and not have a lot of authority in them to move and go the way they need to go. They're going to have more relationship depth. He would also say, he calls level 3 intimacy, which he says is really, primarily the domains of, couples, lovers, partners, close family, friends. And he says that you don't often see this in the organization. In fact, if you do, you might have an issue. But you might see something that's kind of in between, which is a real deep level of trust and friendship and care and even love between people in organizations. And that's not a bad thing. In fact, it's a very good thing. But it takes a lot more work to get from here to there. But this is a vast improvement over mostly what we have, which is level 1. So this is a little quick bit of theory. Let me pause and see if you have any questions about that or just your thoughts and reflections on that where maybe you've seen that materialize before in your organizations. Any thoughts on that? Yes?
The organization I work for right now is basically in the same place as the one you explained in your example, where we're going from a mom and pop kind of nonprofit setup where everyone knew each other, they knew each other's families, and now we're moving into a more corporate style way of doing business, and we're getting more top heavy, and the people on the bottom are feeling left out of the changes and the processes that are, affecting their day-to-day life. So they're trying to find that good balance between us growing and expanding and still keeping that same nurturing environment that we had for our staff before.
Yeah, it's a great example. And one of the things about these organizations that's built up kind of a deep level of trust and engagement with each other is you can destroy it so quickly. I know of an example of an organization that as they grew, they doing really well. They were a startup. They had great connections, great relationships. But as they grew, the senior leaders got together and decided that one of the founders, while he was a great individual, really wasn't what they needed in that role anymore, and they needed to move beyond. And they thought there was great business reasons for that. They needed somebody who could go beyond just the big ideas to really operationalizing it. All these really thoughtful, rational reasons. And they moved him out of the business, and things started to fall apart from a business perspective. The innovation slowed down, their sales slowed down, and when they finally looked at it at post-mortem, they realized that just by taking someone who'd always been a part of it and moving them out without people understanding why, because they made that decision in the group, and everyone would say, well, it's a good decision, but for the first time, somebody had been excommunicated from the family and people didn't know why. And the level of fear that it created, well, if it happened to them, and I don't know why, it could happen to me. And it utterly changed the dynamic. People began to conceal more. People began to kind of hold on to their spot and their turf and be more protective. And the way they were working completely fell apart. And that business actually 2 years later dissolved and they moved on. It was out of business. Whereas they've been on a huge growth trajectory. Now you can't say that's the only thing that happened, but as they went back and looked at it and did some deep analysis, that seemed to be the changing point in the minds of people when things began to be different for them and how they work together. Other thoughts on the levels there? Yes?
On the level 2.5 with the intimacy of teams, has there been work done to quantify the amount of curiosity, the amount of creativity, and the amount of successful innovation against those?
I don't know. I don't know of any work that specifically does that. What I can say is that where they have looked at those teams that have that real depth of relationship, they tend to move very, very quickly because they rarely have to. It's almost like, if you've been with someone a long time, and it's a spouse or a close friend, and you can finish each other's sentences, they get into that kind of dynamic, and so it tends to move really quickly. They tend to exhibit those characteristics, at least from my perspective, what I've seen from an anecdotal perspective. I can't quote any research that says that, though. Yeah. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, I wouldn't want to do the research, but I'd love to see it.
Yeah. Well, we have a lot of students in here. There may be a research project in the making for somebody from the University of New York.
But I got to believe that they have higher levels of success, specifically in terms of innovation.
Yeah, it's well, I'll touch on this next point in a minute. So yes, please.
I've seen research among hospitals conduct where the nurses are very close and they have very personal relationships, and they notice that the number of accidents that are reported are usually higher. And it's not that that hospital has more accidents, it's that they feel more comfortable reporting the accidents. Right. Whereas if the nurses are really disconnected and they're afraid that they're going to get in trouble for that, they made a mistake or there was some sort of accident, there's been differences in I've seen research where that comes up.
That's a great observation. Patrick, right?
Yeah.
It's a great observation in that what's interesting is there's mistakes being made, there's failures happening, and there's two potential attitudes. If there's no trust, I'm afraid to tell you and I'm afraid to tell someone about yours because then you might come after mine. So we just kind of hide the mistakes. And we hear all about the fail fast, and Agile is like, fail quick, fail fast. What that really means is be more thoughtful and catch your mistakes quickly and fix them. It doesn't mean keep failing. And so if there's that level of trust as opposed to the level of fear, you'll find a lot more mistakes, but you'll be looking for mistakes and failures to correct, not to punish. And that's a huge difference. Punish someone or fix what's broken. Great observation. Yes, please.
Hi, Michael. Regarding levels 2, 2.5, and 3, there also cross conscious or unconscious bias. I want to know you personally because you look like me, sound like me, graduate from the same school or whatever it might be. mean, could it also cause those who feel like they're not trusted, some other kinds of issues?
So you're kind of reflecting on a potential dark side that to get to this level of intimacy, that may mean you cluster more towards people that share an unconscious bias. That's very possible. Absolutely, everything light does have a dark side. It's a very good possibility. Yes, please.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
To build on that
Yeah.
thought, is that so related to coaching, a deeper level of intimacy could create some reluctance to really talk about the real issues, because now you have such a close relationship, you might not want to hurt somebody or something like that.
Maybe so. I guess it could be. When I think of this, I mean, you're right. You can have family and close relationship dynamics that are not that intimate. They may be physically intimate, they be emotionally, really stunted or dysfunctional. And so I think if it's a really highly functional relationship here, it's probably more likely people are going to be honest with her. But it is a possibility. Absolutely. Please.
Depends on the culture.
Yeah.
From my little experience, a little bit less than 5 years, I find employees tend to individually look for what they need, but when they hear a word about you're letting someone go, they sort of act defensively as a unit, even if they didn't know that person or never met him even, but they act as a unit and trying to understand why did that person you had to let him go, and is it coming to me next? But if you give them incentives, they don't think if that incentive is going through my colleagues, why is that happening?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a great observation. I mean, if you think about it from and I may have talked about some of this last time we were together for those of you here, but in kind of a basic, reptilian brainstem level, we are programmed to survive. Now, survival is no longer, will I get food and can I make fire to cook it? Survival is, will I keep my job and will I begin to earn more and do better in my career? That's kind of the foundation of survival now in organizations. And so when we see somebody else killed, that's kind of when someone else is fired, we see someone else's demise and our minds tend to catastrophize, right? Geez, they got let go and I don't know why. I wonder what they were doing. I wonder if I'm doing it. It could happen to me. It's going to happen to me. If it happens to me, I won't have a job. If I don't have a job, I'll probably be able to find one. And if I can't find one, then what are my kids going to do? My spouse is going to be unhappy and she's probably going to leave me and then I'm going to get divorced and I'll probably turn to alcohol and I'll just end up lying in the gutter dead. And this happens kind of subconsciously, but that's what people do. And so then they start to try and figure out what was going on, but also defend against it as opposed to engage in conversation around it. And most likely, given the laws and regulations we have from an HR perspective, which most of you know real well, there's no conversation. People get disappeared in organizations. Well, they're gone. Why? No say. And so it leaves it open to interpretation of maybe it's going to be me next. Any other thoughts on this kind of set of levels? Please, yes.
With that personalization thing, I come from a company that will really, our coaches really transparent. We talk about everything. We're very close with our coworkers, especially people we work next to day in, day out. So we had an issue with the store leaders, and the store leader ended up leaving and nobody knew why. Created a huge issue with morale in the store. Our performance went down. We saw customer ratings go down.
Yeah.
People kept complaining after that. It was a mess for a while. We ended up getting a new store leader in. Even when he came in, he was this outgoing, bubbly guy who was really incredible at what he did, but it wasn't really enough. We were still wondering why our leader was just gone one day. We never really knew why. We still didn't know why, and it still caused problems day in and day out with many different employees that were very close to him. Because he helped them grow and develop. He helped me grow and develop myself. So I was a little shocked at it. One day I came into work and they're like, "Oh, you have a new leader now."
Yeah.
Good luck. They kind of threw us to the walls with that. So I can speak to that, how that can cause a lot of issues, especially with the store that had over 104 employees there, and it caused a lot of problems throughout within leadership as well.
It's a great example. That's what we're talking about, is those changes can be so sudden. One of the reasons for having the more open, clear dialogue and the transparency is one act of, untransparency, non-transparency, I don't know what the word is, but one act of that can have a huge change, a huge impact on things. Anything else around that? Does that make sense? Yeah, please.
The organization I'm at, we're very small. We're a nonprofit, so obviously there are a lot of people there. And what's actually going on is we're probably at level 2.5, especially in my department. We're all very close knit. We all know each other's wives pretty much. We come to people's birthdays and weddings and all that. And I'm interested to see how it's gonna change because we see these people like pretty much every day, and now we're going remote. So I'm wondering how that technology piece and going remote is, if it's gonna change that intimacy level, especially like my boss knows everything about me, just about. And
we're at 2.5, not 3.
We're not level 3. We're at 2.5, that's fine. But you know, I'm wondering how that's going to change because she's not going to see me every day, and she's the one that promoted me, and she was the one that coached me in that example we were talking about. So I'm interested to see if that dynamic will change because of like we're not going to see each other maybe like once a week or once a month.
You illustrated a couple of good points. So before I actually address it, I'd like to ask folks in the room here, how do you think that close-knit teams having more kind of remote work at home, you know, via technology as opposed to being in person is going to impact those relationships? What have you seen, or what do you think?
I've seen a lot of siloing in the company I'm in right now. There are a lot of people that work in the field that work at home that telecommute, and I feel like there isn't that communication piece. I feel like we're not really on the same team, even though we're working on the same
Did they start telecommuting, or were they first?
No, they were originally in the office, and then the company started expanding a lot more, so they started going out to the field, and then like basically they moved to different parts of the country to work in their fields, and they started telecommuting a lot. So we do a lot of like video chatting, things like that. We can see them, we can talk to them, but that communication piece of really working next to somebody and really getting into a project.
You had experience of a kind of dividing. Okay, pushing out a little bit. How about others in the room? What have you experienced?
Well, I've led a virtual team for a number of years, and some of the people were hired, you know, into this model. So, you know, hired somebody in San Francisco. We never physically worked together in the same location, but we have a great rapport and a great relationship. We do have a couple of times a year where we get together face to face, and that is, it's very rich. Not just from the work standpoint, but you know, let's go out to dinner and chat, get to know each other, and be more comfortable. So those things help. But with the tools we have, and you know, you have to make an effort to keep the communication going with regular communication. But it works. I mean, for what we need to do.
So it's working for you. Okay. Did I see another hand up around this? Yeah, please.
I actually can go off of that. I work at a company too where I have to communicate with about like 30 hiring managers a day around, you know, the United States, and like he said, like we email all day long. We talk on the phone. How was your weekend? You know, if you need anything, call me on my cell phone. And then once a year, we also get together, and it is like a rich. It's like like oh my gosh, hi, how are you? You know, I talk to you on the phone all the time, and you know, I get to meet you. And tools definitely make it easier, like email, phone. We have so much technology, you know, nowadays too. So we can always Skype. We can always, you know, email each other, text each other, call each other. So I think it does like impact it in a positive way.
And I think if you got stories around the room, you would find more of those examples. Yeah, one more, John?
Yeah, you know, I think maybe the study's already been done, but you know, in the multi-generational work world in which we are part, where you know, millennials, Zs, etc., are much more attuned to having grown up with digital communication as compared to boomers like myself. You know, I find that you know some of the work that I do, which is you know over Zoom or whatever, there's an intimacy that gets missed. The trust I have in being able to read somebody's eyes immediately and to see their body language immediately that I've used throughout my entire career is lost in that video transmission. The person's there talking to them, but I'm not seeing the same thing or feeling it. And it's just interesting, you know, as we're combining all these different generations in the way we've learned.
Yeah, there's definitely generational differences. Absolutely. Well, one more comment here.
Yeah, I was going to say, just like he said, in a multi-generational environment, it's tougher because the baby boomers, anybody outside of the millennials, it's hard for them to really.
It's not the norm for them.
It's not the norm for them.
Yeah.
However, I think that it can be achieved. It's just a lot more work on the cultural side. The culture, there's a lot more work done on the culture, because if you create the culture that permeates across the organization, I can be sitting in San Francisco and you're sitting here and we're tight because we have that common.
I think you're absolutely right. I think a great point that I made later is making now while we're talking about it. is we have these technologies that are allowing us to collaborate. Some of us are more comfortable or less comfortable. But I think everything that everyone said here and shared was true, and there are some different experiences. And they can also be a bit of a red herring. Here's one of the things about digital age, is most of it's not about technology. But when we think digital, we think technology, because our first exposure to things digital was digitalizing the stuff we did, going from a ledger to a spreadsheet, or a spreadsheet to a smart sheet, whatever it was. It was moving from, you know, a record player to a cassette tape to a CD to, you know, digital files. But it was all the same thing. We were just changing with technology. So we tend to think about the technology first. I think for this, it's about the intentionality. It's about, am I going to make the choice to personalize? Am I going to make the choice to connect with you personally? Then the technologies you use, whether you're together or not together, that's just the water you swim in. And some people will be in the very same situation with people distributed or less distributed. Some will become more distributed, like you're talking about. I would hypothesize one thing about that would be, it'll change if you allow it to. And it won't if you say, it is important that we still continue to know and trust each other. Our circumstances have changed. By what mechanism do we do that now? And how well are we doing? And can you have that conversation? How well are we doing? Can we talk about, do we still have the same level of relationship or not? Or are we afraid to because we've never introduced the possibility that relationships change? So it's really about that intentionality and the conversation. One of the things that came up into my mind when you were speaking was what's happening in a lot of places where we have these really tight working groups at that level 2, even 2.5, is they begin to tribalize. And so they're like chunks as opposed to individuals, but the break is in the relationship between the groups or the small tribes. So again, as an organization grows, that's one of the challenges. It begins to tribalize sometimes into functions. Well, we're the sales group, or we're a little bit different from, you know, the finance group, and we begin to form our own subcultures. So a couple of things to look out for. I'm going to go ahead and move forward. If other questions come up, just let me know. Because here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to actually give you guys a chance to discuss this again real quickly. So Ed's concept of personalization, the concept of mutually building a working relationship based on trying to see that person as a whole person, not as a role. So it's having those conversations. The question I'd like to ask you, again, at the tables, probably the same little pairs and groups you are, since moving around will be a little bit awkward tonight since we're kind of all sitting down, is what are some quick ways that you could personalize? What are some ways in your work that you've either done or you think you could do that allow you to see a person as a whole, not a role? And give you about 4 minutes to have that conversation, and we'll take some comments from the table and go ahead and talk amongst yourselves.
So what other way?
Second 10 minutes is going to be like updates the fun 10 minutes is how can we make our better as a person, how can we be better as a team. Just that we never have already we have what we've talked about, how we're improving, or not improving.
Great. Now,
Okay. I'm going to pause your conversation. By the way, they're a great little facilitation tool, but they will check them at the airport every time. And this little bit portable speaker, those two together look very bomb-like, I guess. So, fair warning. Anyway, non sequitur. So what did you come up with? What are some ways that you can personalize in your organizations? Let's hear from the different tables. What'd you come up with?
well, we decided that people around the world are idiots. No, I'm exaggerating here, but what I was saying, what we discovered when we did virtual ideation is that you had to break these instructions down to very simple pieces, A, because of the different cultures, and B, because it was a challenging assignment. And we had 18 offices worldwide creating new stuff. We had to curate it in very small pieces and very successfully because of those constraints. And so I was joking about the idiot thing. The other thing is actually we use people around the world to act as stimuli for everybody on the team. So we had them getting stimuli that could be reintroduced to the team as a whole. So they became experts in certain areas that helped build the whole team thing.
Great. So having some champions locations to really help with that connecting and getting to know each other as kind of the whole people. Absolutely. Yeah. What else? Other thoughts? Yes.
I have a friend who is in the forefront of the digitization of General Electric. And it's amazing how he operates and crosses age groups and whatever, because it's just simply finding something in common to talk about, to get together about. It's that simple.
Probably someone
connecting points.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so crossing a lot of going. A friend of mine says, talk to somebody you wouldn't normally talk to. I mean, how many times do you go to your organization and still talk to the same 3 people, as opposed to just reaching out? I mean, it can be as simple as that, talking to someone you don't normally talk to. Just saying, hey, who are you? Here's who might take an opportunity to get to know them. Great, thank you. What else? Yeah, please.
Based on my personal experience, I don't have any work experience, but a lot of emails that I receive as a potential client, they're all sending me emails with my first name on it, even though it's just a mass email. But I can feel like I can get personalized. I feel like I'm being personalized from them because they're addressing me with my first name.
Yeah, so it's an interesting thing you bring up, because there's a real danger with this personalization to make it be personalization. And we've all been marketed to personalize. I get very personalized phone calls to my cell phone all the time. And they know my name, which I don't want them to, and they want to talk about things, or very personalized calls to my house, which I don't want. So personalization is really that, what can I do to see you? Again, to see the person that you are, not the role that you're in. So what else did you come up with around personalization, ways to do that? Please.
Well, one of the things I did, I was talking about a mentor program, and we had senior level folks and individual contributors, and just the icebreaker.
Yeah.
So some of the questions, everybody had to pick a color, and there was a question such as, you know, who is your shiro, who are your hero?
Yeah.
Or if they made a movie of you, who would play,
Yeah.
you know, who would play you? And it really humanized and personization.
Yes.
Because you got to know the individual, because people were talking, joking, you know, Brad Pitt, or someone talked about how their daughter is their hero or shiro, and it really was like, wow, and you learn things about people that you would never have learned before.
Absolutely. So some great illustrations there. I'll tell you, you're right. You know, he's talking about humanizing, but the word gets used so much. I like that he's tagged personalizing on it here. But a couple of things. First thing you said is, well, you can ask them questions. That's pretty easy. And what's interesting about questions is you ask a question, one answer might be Brad Pitt, and that's an answer up here. And one might be about my daughter, and that's an answer down here. So when you ask a question that's personal, even though it's not intrusive, but about that as a person, they can choose how far they want to go in their answers. You open a door that they can walk in. So, you know, opening those doors as opposed to locking them into a role and saying, what are you doing, what am I doing, what's our task, actually makes the relationship deeper. And were you surprised when people are more intimate and more open than you might have expected them to be? And instantly you have that kind of empathy, understanding. It gets your attention, doesn't it? You listen to them. Now you want to know more, and they can kind of shift who they are in your eyes as well. Great, thank you. It's a great illustration. What else? How can you personalize, please?
I did something, so for example, when we had new meetings, new groups coming together, and especially always new hires, I would ask them, send a picture, anything, a picture that depicts what you're all about.
Yeah.
And I got all these pictures, and then put them on, you know, display, and then the team had to figure out who belonged to what picture. So eventually it came up.
Yeah.
The moment, because people like to talk about themselves, the moment your picture comes up, then they start telling all of their life story. And that was a moment we had the teams gel right off the bat. People that had never seen each other. And so that's one of those things. And those things can be done virtually too.
Absolutely. And the great thing about it is a lot of times we overlook those things or we minimize them because, well, they're not about business. They're not about the work. And yet, a team that gels quickly and works together much more seamlessly with trust does a much better job, and the work outputs they have are much better. But we tend to still embrace this old paradigm of there's this work and life separation. I'm one person here. Generally what we do is I'm a person when I'm not at work, and I'm in a role when I'm at work. And that's why amongst your friends and family, hopefully, there's more trust and concern and caring. And sometimes at the office is a little more lying and concealing and other things that aren't so healthy going on. It's because we step into being a role. And you know, we do that oftentimes if there's things we don't want to do in work, or we have to, you know, represent something that goes against our values. Well, it's not me, that's just the job. And that never tends to work out real well. There's some things in history that say, you know, saying it was just my job is probably not a great response. So thank you, great example. Anything else, other ways to personalize? I've got a couple, but before I share them, yeah, go in the back and come here next.
Yeah, I remember one of my friends, close friends back home in Saudi Arabia, he was hired at the industrial agency, it's a government agency for industries. He said the first day he stepped in, everybody was greeting him by his first name, and he didn't know why. Eventually he found out the HR department has sent an email with his picture, his department, his full name, and his role. And in the corridors he was greeted by almost everyone. He said, I felt like I was the CEO the first day. And that was a great, I think, example of
you know what the way the HR department did is allow people to invest in learning about it quickly, so it wasn't a huge time commitment, but said, look, this person is important enough to know. Because as human beings, I mean, one of our basic needs is we all want to be recognized, we want to be seen. And so if you begin to feed that in an organization, that's useful. If you look at really dysfunctional organizations, like if you study actual, the research around like prisoners of war and things like that, what people tend to do to survive is become completely passive and want to go unnoticed. So that's the opposite place of being unnoticed, being unseen is a reaction to being in a really, really, really bad place. Well, organizations aren't that great. You know, if we feel unseen, we don't feel like it's a great place to be. If we feel seen and recognized, it makes us feel much more important, much more a part of things. Great example. Rick, you had something else.
John mentioned when he first got up the value of networking, and one of the benefits of everybody here today, you get to meet some new people, you get to meet people that you've known for a while, and that's an important part, whether it's in an organization like this or a company. One of the things that's become more difficult is as you go more virtual, it's more difficult to be able to build those relationships and get to know people. One of the organizations I work with has a monthly conference call. And what we typically do is it starts promptly at 5:30 at night, and then they go through business stuff, but they started at 5. And the reason is people get on the phone and start talking, and you get to listen to people, what's going on in their lives, where they just came back from vacation. It's probably not quite as good as face-to-face when you can, direct the conversation. But you're amazed how many things you learn about people by just listening. And then, oh, you're going to Italy, I'm going to Italy. You know what? Why don't we do a separate sidebar and we can talk about it? And you build those relationships. So there are ways to do it, even if it's done virtually.
It's a great illustration of just having time for talking. Like you got here, we didn't get just down to me talking to you. You had a chance to talk to each other. Then you got your tables. You'll notice I purposely asked you to talk to each other. Make time for talking. Now, I could just stand up here and just blah, 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 which is boring for all of us, but that time to talking allows you to build a little bit more connection with each other. Maybe some of you who are students together know each other, maybe learn something about each other that you didn't know even at this opportunity to talk. And so making those spaces is huge, and finding those spaces is huge. There was one comment here, I think, as well?
Yeah, so kind of when it comes to recognition, how important that is in a company. The last job that I had, one thing that we always did when we had new hires come in was kind of just go around the room and we all ask the new person our questions about them.
Right.
Like, what's your favorite cheese? Where are you from? Who's your favorite Marvel character? All things like that, just that are really personal that maybe they wouldn't have ever told us without us asking them right in that moment. We'd also do things, because as important as it is for them to tell us about who they are, it's important for us over time to tell them how we feel about them. So we'd also do events where we just basically go around the room and throw a ball and say, all right, this is what I think about you across the room, then you pass it to them. This is what I think about you. And it was all really positive, specific feedback and just recognition. It really makes you feel like you're part of the team. It really makes you happy to come into work and you're just eager to come in for the start of the day. I think it's really important. Yeah.
You create spaces, you have the conversation, you have things that prompt it, do things. I mean, there's so many simple things. Let me just throw a couple other ones out here that I think. The first one, not sound too soft and fluffy, but is caring. If I'm interacting with you, if I'm asking you questions, if I do it from a perspective of just, obviously I'm asking it to get something out of it, but you can tell I don't really care for you, that makes a difference. One of the things I love that Ed says, he says, if you want to build these types of relationships, stop looking in the mirror and don't think so much about you that day. Go in thinking, what can I do for somebody else? How can I help others today? Because think about it, if everybody went into work saying, not how can I take care of myself, but how can I take care of you, you'd have the vast majority of the company taking care of you, and you'd be doing some taking care of others. So it makes a huge difference. But most of us are thinking about ourselves. So caring, taking care of others is huge. Choosing to get personal. We already talked about this, but make the choice. I'm going to have a personal conversation with you. I'm going to engage with you personally to personalize you. For those of you, and there's a lot of folks in the rooms that are consultants, you can walk into a prospective client's office and get right down to the proposal. We can say, oh, is this a picture of your family? How old are your kids? And if you don't really get is that your family? How old are your kids? Then they're going to know you're authentic. But asking the question, being curious about them, most people aren't going to say, I'm sorry, my family's not important, where's your proposal? They'll talk about that because they're interested in themselves. And it gives an opportunity to connect. Now, some of you might say, well, is that manipulative? Am I trying to just do this so there's this patina of relationship? I don't know if you're a jerk, maybe that's true. But most of us, if we do it actually from a place of caring, that's not what it's all about. Say, I'm interested in who you are, because I'm going to be working with you. Some of my income that I need is going to be reliant upon you. I'm going to be working with your organization. Do I want to do that? Do we share any values? Do we have things in common that will make this good work for me? Because many of you, especially in the consulting roles, have all had a client where you're like, oh man, I wish I'd never gone down this road because this person is more trouble than they're worth, and the things that they stand for and do, and that's something I want to be a part of, because you never took that opportunity maybe to get to know them. Another one, interesting one, minimizing subordination. So now I came out of GE, which definitely has a hierarchy, and I had people that worked for me. I can tell you some things that I did. First of all, I was never anybody's boss. In fact, I tend to get rid of that phrase by calling the people that work for my boss, hey boss, come here. And I don't do it to be silly. I do it just to say, look, let's get rid of that word, because that sounds more like chain gang than anything else. But also, I make sure I spend time asking them, what do they think? What do they want to do here? Now, I know there's times where it's my job to make a choice, but I'd rather make a smarter choice by getting people involved in that and taking a little more time up front and saying, what do you think? Which way should we go here? And in areas where I don't have to make the decision, I don't. So that's your choice. Well, what do you think? I said, look, keep me in the loop on what you're doing so I understand it. And if there's something that you missed that may make you make a different decision, I can tell you. And so that I know how to have your back if someone brings it up to me. Otherwise, it's your choice. So getting rid of that control tends to drive a much higher level of engagement. And the last one is this ask more, tell less, choose curiosity. Once again, I'm going to ask you questions. That's being more coach-like. So let me just kind of hit this part real quick. The problem that we face is that most solutions and problems are not in the individual, the node. They're in their interaction. They're in the relationships between them. But we spend a lot of time trying to fix people and say, I'm going to work with you to your, Anna, your person was, we'll work with you and make you better, and that didn't work, or work with you to tell you what's wrong with you. Your person wanted to work with you and help you, that was good. But we're working on the individual as opposed to the relationship. If it's one-sided, it's all about them, it's about fixing a person. You know what, that person doesn't need fixing. What probably needs fixing or improvement is the way that you interact with them, and that takes the two of us. So, and I know a lot of this sounds real, kind of we're talking about relationships and soft and fluffy. We start out with digital. This is huge for digital organizations. I'm just recently worked with an organization, I can't contractually say their name, but they're really big software company. And we trained a group of 3,200 of their top leaders in a commercial capacity on these types of skills around asking more questions and saying less. For working with their employees, but also for working with their customers. So they find themselves in a place after a very successful run, having sold products. Built some relationship and sold some products, but now they have to be understanding and selling business outcomes through the use of these products. And this requires a level of relationship, of understanding that client, of understanding what they truly need, of building a level of intimacy and trust that they've never had before. And that they're seeing these types of ways of working as the key to their success in a digital world, selling digital products and competing with the myriad of competitors out there that want to eat their lunch and break down the massive machine that they've built. Make sense? So, I want to give you a couple of tools. We got about 20 minutes. We don't have time for a few more questions, but I want to give you a couple of tools. And I will get the slides figured out how to get to everyone here as well. We do that. But so this is a model, and actually this is a photo of a card that we built when I was at Gartner to use in training. And there's a book called Click by Orion Rambraf, and it talks about relationships, proximity, things like that. But they have this really interesting sort of a model. And it talks about the level of interaction you have. So here's some examples of questions at a customary level. So it's not social nicety, like, hey, how are you? Oh, great, how are you? I mean, how many times, it's rare that you have that one person, the one kind of sociopath, and say, hey, how are you? Oh, jeez. I got to tell you about my problems with my wife. And you've never met them, and they go down that road. This is a social nicety. It's a question that really doesn't matter. That we're just saying it just to connect initially. Then there's factual things where you collect data. Say, hey, what happened? What happened is a deeper level of question. What happened with you? Maybe judging that data, more evaluative. How was that for you? More emotional. what was the impact? How did you feel about that? And then self-reflective, what did you learn, or what did you learn about you? And we demonstrated this once for a group, and it was really interesting. I was over in Europe, and I had flown over there for a meeting, and the company I was at, the policy at the time was you could only fly business class over 8 hours. And it was a real contentious policy because at a certain level of seniority, they all got to do that. So everybody hated this policy, and we had to go back and forth across the Atlantic. So I had flown over there, and I happened to have a couple of neck and back issues that are, personal things to me I don't necessarily share with everyone. But they made it I'm allowed to fly on the flights over 4 hours. So we said, well, let's just demonstrate this. And the person I was with said, hey, how are you? I said, I'm fine, how are you? Great. So can what happened, to you yesterday? How was your flight? Oh, it was good. I flew over from JFK, got in, this morning. Felt pretty rested, feeling good today, not feeling any jet lag. Great. So how was it for you? I said, well, I said it was good. I mean, I felt rested. I was glad to be able to, to get over here and to, not feel like I'm going to fall asleep at the end of the day. Okay. Well, why was that? Well, I got to fly business class so I could sleep overnight. They have the little flatbed seats. How do you feel about that? I said, well, I actually feel kind of awkward about it now that I'm saying it because I know that most people when they make that trip don't get to do that. And that feels kind of a little bit like I got something they didn't. I feel kind of singled out and, oh, well, what does that say about you? And then we got into this conversation. But you can see that the conversation immediately got a lot deeper. So there's more risk, there's more intimacy as you go deeper. But this is a really good tool to have if you're building relationships, to know that you can start to go down these roads and ask simple questions that move from just the social nicety into things about them. Now, you might not do that instantly, but as you build relationships, you want to have some questions you can ask. So the other side of the card here, what happened, how was it for you, how did it affect you, what was the impact? These kinds of questions can get you into a depth of relationship very, very, very quickly if people are okay with you asking them. And to be okay with asking, you just have to kind of say, hey, can I ask you a little bit deeper question about that? Can I ask you a little more? If it's too personal, you can stop me. But tools like this allow you to really dig a little bit deeper and to know what your questions are all about. Make sense? Any questions about that, just as a rapid tool to share? Okay. The last one I want to share with you is I'm going to stump for my friend's book, not because I want you to buy it, but because my friend Michael, full disclosure, part of what I do in the consulting work I do now is I do delivered programs for Box of Crayons. And it's because I love it. I started working with it at Gartner 10 years ago when he was building it, and it had a huge impact on the effectiveness of our organization. But this is a great book to really operationalize curiosity and be more coach-like. So my offer to you is, in a minute my email is going to pop up on the screen there. If you send me an email and ask for it, I will send you a link to download the book for free in ebook. So you get your own copy of it. It's a great book. I highly recommend it. It costs you nothing. I'm using to send you the information, and we can get you the link. It's not going to put you on a mailing database. I just want to send you the book, so don't worry about it. You won't get any of those robocalls from me because you asked for it. So that gives us about up to 50 minutes if we want to stay that long. But what I've tried to do is I've tried to kind of walk through that the key to really building effective relationships and being effective in the digital era is actually about the relationships. It's about how we are with each other. And this is the part of digitalization that is so overlooked, but yet so crucial for organizations to succeed. I tried not to overwhelm you with stories. I've got a lot of them if you want to ask. But let me just pause there and say, are there any questions that you'd like to ask or anything else you'd like to talk about before we get done with the evening? Start over here, yes.
I had a comment/question. Thank you so much for your presentation. I love the idea of personalization versus personalization. But one comment that I would make is that in trying to see the whole person, that ultimately is affected by the culture of the organization and what the display rules of the organization are. Because if I'm supposed to check my emotions at the door, leave my emotions out of the workplace,
sure,
and that ultimately will impact the intimacy that you can achieve in the workplace environment.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, the deeper you try, the more countercultural you're building those relationships is, the harder it is to do, certainly. And people have also brought up, geopolitical differences. And again, these are gross generalizations, so untrue, but maybe resonate. In some more Latin cultures, there is more effusive, more emotionality. In some Asian cultures, there's less, of that emotionality. nonetheless, I mean, you can still move farther into that, because it's just your cultural centers of gravity are different, but you can become more relationship-based and more into those relationships. But you're right. There are organizations where you might not fit if that's who you want to be. I would also throw out that those organizations are going to struggle in the digital era. So, great observation. Other questions? Go ahead, yes.
I think you can also create subcultures. And I think many years ago when we brought two companies together, one was definitely more family-oriented and the other not so much. And one of the managers from the family-oriented said to the new HR VP, you're taking away all those things that brought us together, the family atmosphere, and you just went on. And finally, the VP said, "You know what? You have an opportunity to continue to create that culture by the way that your behavior and what you do. You can continue some of that. It's not necessarily going to go away." Right? But you, as the leader, anytime I think about coaching and how you interact with others, you have an opportunity to impact the culture that is within your department. And you can see it all the time, I think, in a lot of companies, how different departments interact with each other.
I think you're absolutely right. And that person has a choice, and it may feel like an overwhelming choice of, well, I've got to push our culture out. I actually know it's probably more you need to be more coach-like and just ask some of those questions and see if people respond. I mean, we talk so much about change, organization change, big changes, which usually ends up becoming a big plan to market an idea to everyone. But change is really people's behavior shifting. Here's a simple behavior. Ask more questions and give less advice. If you start to do that and more people benefit from that and start to take it on, cultures do change. They would change in that direction, but taking on some culture initiative is probably not going to work. Great insight. What else? Other comments, questions? Yeah.
Yeah, I was interested. In the last 10 years, obviously, we've heard about disruption and innovation, which is close to the work we do and all. I found myself last month in a vision, mission, values assignment, talking to this company about a culture of curiosity. And as I thought about that, I realized, that's sort of pre-innovation, and that's really important. Yeah. And I mentioned that because then last weekend I was, happened to pick up HBR, and of course the cover story, I don't know if you've seen it, is on a culture of curiosity. Yeah. So I think it's probably in the air.
It is.
I think it's, this caring thing is kind of cool, that we're moving to maybe a more humanistic corporate environment. Wouldn't that be nice?
Well, it's interesting, the programs that I do when I partner with Box and Crayons start off as coaching skills, and they're very specific small groups buying it. All of a sudden, the business has exploded, and it's these large organizations saying, we don't know how to be more curious. And so, for us in here, when you get the book, it's a simple set of questions that you just use. And what's really kind of, sneaky is not the right word, but really subtle about it, is that most big culture change things, they start with, here's the vision, here's the values, let's put them on cards and move them out, have all these focus groups. What we just do is say, hey, ask these questions. Just ask those questions. We don't start with beliefs, because changing beliefs are very difficult. But changing behaviors, if they're little behaviors, is easy. If someone says, take a step to the right as opposed to take a step to the left, well, I can do that. Ask a question here first as opposed to give an answer. I can do that. It's a simple behavior that once I start to embody, once I start to act that behavior, and it works for me, then the beliefs start to form. And I think that most of our culture change work has started backwards. Let's get them to share the beliefs and we'll change the behaviors. I say change the behaviors so it illustrates the beliefs for them. It's a great observation. I think it's really taking off. Yes, please.
Yes, you already started talking about the program you provide for companies, and by asking questions, and it actually has a big impact on the effectiveness. I'm just very curious around, how do you do that? You train the leaders how to ask questions? How did you measure the effectiveness?
Yeah, sure. And by the way, I'm not here to set for Box and Crayons. It's a great example of it. But so I can give you a quick example. When I was at Gartner, I was working with a group of our sales leaders. And these were folks that went out there a little bit different for the mold there. They went out and just sold business. They didn't keep that account. They didn't maintain a relationship. They sold it, passed it off to somebody else. But so they were, calling into a lot of organizations that we had no business with whatsoever, didn't know the organization, didn't know its products and services. We're like most people when you get a call, do you want to? No, I don't. Hang up. And so it was a tough job. And so one of the questions that we use is, what's the real challenge here for you? With emphasis on real, challenge, and for you. And I said to him, look, asking this question is a way of really engaging with someone to get clear on what their needs are. Because you're just going out with the product hoping that they have a need that matches that. And quite probably because you're there to take their money for it, they're already set up to say no. So we said to them, I just came up with a conversation, I said, you could try asking, what's the challenge here for you, and what else, and just keep asking it. And just keep asking it, because that's one of the pieces of advice we give. Just keep asking, say, okay, oh, anything else? Is there another challenge here for you? Is there anything else? And this guy came back to me, I wasn't even planning to teach that as a sales program, and he walked back in and he goes, I've been doing this for years, and I've never had anything happen in less than like 6 weeks. He goes, I called a guy today for the first time and I asked him, what's the challenge here? What else, and what else, and what else? And within about 15 minutes, we got to a point where he said something, and he said, are you telling me you can help me with that? And he said, yes, we can. He goes, fax me the paperwork, I'll sign it today. Because he took the time to really find out what that person was struggling with, and he was really actually curious. It wasn't like, I'm gonna keep asking this to sell you. I'm curious to what you're struggling with. So, we see effectiveness like that in client relationships. We also see effectiveness in teams, especially as things move more to this kind of agile way of working, right? The real iterative way of working. The interesting thing about agile is if it's not awkward, you're doing it wrong. If it's not, I'm not sure, why are you doing that? Tell me more, because that doesn't make sense to me. If you're not having that conversation, you're doing it wrong. And if you're not taking the time to be really thoughtful and say, there's a little thing in the back of my mind, I'm not going to do like I do in other meetings, this pass it by because I don't want to embarrass anyone. I'm going to say, wait a minute, have you considered this? Those are the conversations you need to get to be able to move fast. And that's why things like being more coach-like is showing up so effective in organizations. It's increasing speed, it's increasing what I've been referring to as time to failure. You fail much more quickly, you're able to pivot quickly, as opposed to these long, drawn-out things when you finally admit it was a mistake when you have to. Does that help answer the question at all?
Yeah, I can totally connect that with like enrollment conversation in coaching.
Yeah.
And also in my own like working business, like working in a corporation.
Yeah, absolutely. Great, thank you. Any other questions you have? We got just a couple minutes left. I'm glad to take one or two more if there are any. Yes.
I was thinking you could have a deep trust in someone's judgment that you don't have to question his word. For example, for a long time, then that person could do something wrong, and then again, you question yourself, why didn't I ask him or sit down with him and discuss? But over the 10, 15 years, the amount of years required for you to be satisfied with that person's judgment, where do you draw the line of not asking the questions anymore for that specific person?
I'm not sure I quite know how to answer your question, but here...
People tend to develop a trust of judgment for other people. I trust, for example, Michael here. We've been working together for 10, 15 years. Now I trust his judgment. I don't need to question his judgment every time. But eventually he makes a mistake, an honest one, that if I had to sit down with him and discuss it, it wouldn't be happening in the first place. When do I draw the line as a leader, a CEO, when trusting people's judgments? When do I say trusting judgment is not an issue for me. I have to sit down every single time with any person. Is that what you're saying?
So I have a couple of thoughts on that before I share. Does anybody else have a thought to answer that question?
I was just going to say, if you've got a culture, and I've got a little different background, but coming from this trust is the questions. So it's not you don't trust the judgment, you're trying to understand the rationale why. So one of the reasons the Army turned around a lot of stuff they did back in '85, they came in what's called the AAR. Many people may have seen it, the after action review. So it was going out and after an exercise, it wasn't sitting down and passing judgment or questioning judgment. It was asking questions, what should have happened, what did happen, what should we do differently? So it's not challenging or questioning, it's understanding the rationale for what you're doing.
So I think in your example, if the relationship is such that Michael doesn't want to say what he did wrong, then there is a relationship that has some fear that if he says what he does wrong, he'll be punished. If the moment he said, that's what I did wrong, he knows that that's a moment for him to get better at that, and that it's okay to do things wrong, it's okay to make mistakes. One of the problems that happens in organizations at the macro level is we're not comfortable with being wrong, we're not comfortable with making mistakes. We've been so successful that that's what we're used to, and we don't know how to fail. And again, it's not meaning massive failures, that means we don't know how to say, oh yeah, I totally screwed that one up, didn't I? Okay. And we're not open to people pointing it out to us, because for most of us, if we've made a mistake, we're afraid it's going to come back to haunt us. In an organization where there's less transparency and less trust, that's the case. In an organization, so I'll give you an example from GE. And back in the day, and I'll finish with this, if you made a big money mistake, that was probably the end of your time there. You didn't make big money mistakes, right? That was not what leaders did. Leaders got it right. When we were building the digital organization, and I can't quote the numbers, but we realized early on as we were building data centers, we invested a certain amount in data centers, and it was a substantial amount of money. Then, as we were building those data centers and building out our strategy, that's what we were going to do, we had the PowerPoints and the maps and the plans and moving forward the strategy. Amazon and Microsoft leapfrogged in the billions they spent on building data centers. So now the strategy we had was no longer the right strategy. In days gone by, we might have stuck with it just because we didn't want to look like we made a mistake. But the head of finance at Digital went to our CFO and said, we're going to have to stop, go in a different direction to write this off. And it was a big number. And he kind of thought, this could be it for me. And CFO looked at him and said, wow, okay. How much didn't we waste because we're stopping now? And he said, well, the full figure would have been 10 times where we're at. And he said, well, that's good then. And that was a cultural changing moment that kind of resounded around the organization, because people realized that there was a mistake that had to be made because it was the right strategy when we started. And we could not foresee what those companies were going to do. And they did it. We had to say, what was right is now wrong. Now we have to move in a different direction. And so that speed to failure, time to failure, is what most of our large organizations need to increase now. And the kind of things we're talking about here can actually allow people to stop the things that aren't working sooner, to feel like they identify what's broken quickly, that it's not going to come back to haunt them personally. In fact, it becomes a virtue as opposed to a problem, and that they can move that organization ahead faster than their competitors. And it's like the old joke about the two hunters that are out in the jungle, and the two photographers are out in the jungle, and they're taking pictures of all the animals and the giraffes and the hippos, and they see a lion. And the lion sees them, and they realize the lion's going to come in their direction. And so they look at each other, and the one guy sits down and starts taking off his hiking boots and putting on his running shoes. His friend says, what are you doing? You can't outrun a lion. He goes, I don't have to outrun the lion. Most of our organizations are right now, our big legacy organizations. You just have to outrun them. You don't have to be a .com startup. You don't have to be a tech giant. You just have to get transparent and nimble enough that you move a little bit faster. So hopefully this has been valuable to you. It's always great to spend time with the group. Thank you. We're done. Email my box for friends address, and I'll get it to you. Please follow me on LinkedIn and join up.
Great job, Michael.
Thank you.
Zero just comes in.
So anything else you want to share with them before they cut out?
We do, thanks. Thanks for reminding us. A couple things, folks. Please fill out your evaluations. We also have a couple of drawings. If you all have one free meeting and a book, right?
And a book.
And it looks like nobody gave their cards yet.
That's correct. So I'm collecting now, and I have the book. I have the
Free
book,
meeting
Tom's got the meeting.
and book.
And again, please do stay in contact. Glad to connect with anybody if you have kind of follow-up questions. I'm big on networking. That's like my friends John and Rick here, so always a pleasure.
Yeah. Oh, you place it, Shayla's still.